For those of you who have seen some of my presentations before, this is kind of taking a different angle to it, mainly because we're getting to a point where we have to do something to shut down the machine. And this isn't political, it has to come from Columbus. That's our representation, that's where legislation gets passed. So while some of you may not have necessarily all the information you want on the backstory of Common Core, there are so many videos online between mine all the way to people who are doing it on a national level, or national voices, I should say. So I would ask you to go and watch one of those if some of the information that you were hoping to have today is not what's in my presentation. Today's presentation is primarily focused to educate not just the citizens, but quite honestly, elected officials, that they are the ones that have been primarily betrayed. They have been sold a false set of goods with absolutely no evidence of their worth. They have, at the local level, directed and commanded millions of dollars to put forth this effort, all on the falsehood that these things are proven, that they will raise outcomes, and that they're what our communities wanted to begin with. So while the Fed Ed takeover has gone on, started in 1965, ramped up tremendously in 1994 with the ability for the federal government to offer grants to the states, basically to implement their agenda at the state level. I'm going to pick up starting in 2008 because that's where the current version, what I call the capstone of the takeover it begins occurring. And the idea that for those who are educators or in the ed community in this room, if there's anything you take from today, it's that this is not the latest fad. Oh, this will go away and they'll replace it with something else. Oh yeah, they will. And if you think about it, every time they've replaced it, it's been more oppressive and less control for those who are at the local level, and certainly for the parents. So I liken this to that for the last 30 years in particular, it's about 10 yards at a time. They go full force, and about 10 yards worth stay in actually in operation within the schools. What happened in 2008 was a perfect storm. Once Obama got into office and they had $1 trillion worth of stimulus funds to play with, that's when they really got crafty. And instead of going for 10 yards, they went for 30. And I contend that they fumbled the ball. Now, we can make the decision whether we're going to pick it up and run it back and reclaim our children's education, their future in our community schools, or they're going to run it in and finally have the touchdown and it'll all be over. Because truly, once this is done, there is no turning back. You'll be able to tinker around the edges, but any sense of local control, any command over your child's education future, over your property tax dollar, it's over. It's a falsehood. They have built this, and it's a well-designed machine. And they have, at this point, all the money and influence to get it done. The only thing that will stop them is us, meaning parents, the public ed community, and the local community leaders stepping up and being all on the same side of the argument. Because that is what brings them down on the other side. Part of this whole game has been to keep us so busy fighting amongst ourselves, whether it's Democrats and Republicans fighting against each other, whether it's the public ed community, teachers unions, the charter school community. I've got news for you. What I know for a fact from spending way too much time in Columbus is that first off, nothing productive gets done there. And secondly, that they're all of those communities that are being represented, that are fighting factions down here, they're sitting up in the same room, around the same table, pulling the same levers as the same master plan. I can't find a measurable difference between any of them. And the longer they keep us busy fighting one another, the farther the program gets entrenched. And the reason that they are all in the same room at the same table is because that's where the money is. So who's directing Ohio's education reform? As with all things in life, follow the money. Again, going back to the perfect storm of 2009. Years of Ohio reform groundwork comes together financed through the massive federal stimulus. There was $53 billion allotted to the U.S. Department of Education. They took $49 billion of it and put it through the state fiscal stabilization funds. Every governor participated, every state. $4 billion of that was carved out for what we know as the race to the top competition. Cash-strapped states all took the bait. And here's where it starts. This is the education reform assurances. And when you hear assurances, that's a guarantee. That's a commitment, it's a contract. So Governor Strickland at the time made these 4 fundamental assurances. Those are the general assurances that would become race to the top. They are to build out a student longitudinal data system based with all the criteria being federally dictated. It had to be interoperable so that it could talk, every data point could talk to another state's data point. They had to be interoperable. They had to adopt a common set of standards among the states. There was only one set of those eventually. They had to prescribe to a national assessment, and then there ended up being 2 consortium to choose from. And the thing that has truly turned our schools upside down, they had to agree to allow the federal government to dictate how they evaluated their teachers and principals. Again, every governor in the country agreed to those 4 assurances initially. You can't see at the bottom of the slide, but also we were one of the few state houses that changed parties in 2010. When you have a grant that is continuing over the course of an election, the incoming elected has to agree to those assurances within 90 days. Governor Kasich sat down and agreed to the same assurances, that he would walk that out for the duration of the grant. You take those 4 assurances, and this is what we're living today. This is those 4 assurances in detail. On the right-hand side of that is the rubric that literally is a image from our Race to the Top grant. It shows the points we earned. We were the top score for our demographic, the population of students in Ohio. Within those assurances, the generalities, the Common Core standards, highly aligned common assessment, data systems to inform instruction, embed technology. That inform instruction is huge because when they say they're just standards, they're not. They're instruction-based standards. They tell you how to teach. And those words are literally on that rubric. Federal level control of teacher and principal evaluations. That, as we know, is the OTES and OPES system and the RESA. Teach for America and charter school expansion. That was required. You had to detail how you were going to get that done. Everything on that rubric has been codified through legislation piece by piece. House Bill 1, House Bill 290, 153, 525. I mean, they go on and on and on. If you go out to Ohio Revised Code and search Common Core, you can't find it anywhere. You'll find Ohio Core, you'll find Next Generation Learning, you'll find 21st Century Learning Skills, blah, blah, blah. It's all college and career readiness that all began in House Bill 1 under Governor Strickland. But this is what we suffer under. So when they tell you they're just standards, they are not. The standards are simply the nucleus of the Common Core State Standards Initiative, which required all of the that you see there. So who declared the crisis? Who decided in 2008 there was some education crisis that had not been dealt with? Because if you go back and look, we've been in a crisis for about 20 plus years, according to all of the philanthropic community. So you have to consider who's declaring the crisis. Well, it's who makes the rules, it's who enforces the rules, and who reports the numbers. And it's also who is served by the special interest dollar. So all of this philanthropy that you're hearing about, all that is doing in Ohio, quite honestly, is buying public policy. And the ed community is where they have decided to reside. This is an example of what I was saying about them pitting us against one another. If you were to ask somebody about Jeb Bush and Linda Darling Hammond, they'd say that they're the far opposite of the spectrum regarding Common Core or any other ed policy, and probably any other philosophical persuasion. When I put this slide together, the right-hand side of the slide, the only thing I had to change initially was the name of the foundation. Everything is the same. Top donors are the same: Gates, Helmsley, Carnegie, GE. Their ed reform plans call for Common Core standards, assessments, accountability, digital learning, charter schools. The only difference between those two, which I found extremely interesting, is Linda Darling Hammond's foundations received 3-to-1 dollars from Gates. Now, she is held up within the ed community, the public ed community, as the darling of the anti-corporate ed reform. Why is Gates so involved in this? Besides trying to turn a buck, and to me at this point, once you become as wealthy as Gates, it's not about the money anymore. It's a power. The multi-state human capital development data system. One of the questions that people will ask is, why would corporate America want a dumbed-down workforce? You're looking at it the wrong way. Think about what they're able to do when they have every data point on children from, in some cases, birth. Certainly now in Ohio code, everybody's in it by the time they're in kindergarten. If you have that data from that point all the way through the end of their education, whether it be high school, college, trade, you are developing your own workforce. It's like a chess game. They can put people where they want them, how they can best serve corporate America /and/or the state. I mean, besides the fact that you're building your workforce, think about the consumers you're creating. I mean, you can guide them to basically be consumers of, for one thing, all this technology. We're not developing technology innovators, we're developing technology consumers. Within this 3-page report, this is from June of 2009, he talks about that they're going to develop human capital for state stakeholders. And state stakeholders have been redefined in the last decade. They are not parents and local communities. The stakeholders are the corporate America and politicians. Failure of 3 rounds of federal grants. They identified that we could not get the student longitudinal data system done until we came with the stimulus dollars, and the money was just too large for to turn down. Talks about the stock and flow of human capital. That's workforce development. They want to be able to control that. They want to be able to disaggregate the data in order to shape policy and equalize outcomes. Again, that's public policy being purchased by the philanthropic community at the expense of the local communities to our control and financially. See, the agenda-driven special interests, these are not state legislatures or citizens in control of this. Again, to show the contrast of who we're dealing with, that they are all in the same room at the same table. Jeb Bush's foundation, there's the major benefactors, again, all the same: Gates, Broad, GE. On one of the links that has since been scrubbed on the foundation site were the star reformers in each state. Our state had 2 representatives, Senator Coley and Senator Lehner. Senator Lehner, if you're unaware, is the chairwoman of the Senate Education Committee. Bill Coley sits on that committee as well. Interestingly, though, besides that, because you'd say, well, they're Republicans, that doesn't, not real surprising. David Coleman's also on that same list. David Coleman being the architect of the Common Core standards and recognized as such. If you look at the pictures and the agendas from his summits every October, this one he had Arnie Duncan and Podesta, John Podesta from the Center for American Progress, which is probably the most leftist organization in the country. So again, this is not political in the sense that it's partisan. This is not the right against the left. As you can see, they're pretty cozy. Linda Darling Hammond. She's with the Stanford Center for Opportunity Policy and Education. SCOPE is the acronym. For those of you somewhat familiar, put a C in front of that, and that's what C-SCOPE stood for in Texas. She's on the list of the 10 scariest people in education reform, and there's a reason for that. She is everywhere, and particularly in Ohio. She's Obama's with his administration on the Equity and Excellence Commission. She wrote his education platform in 2008. His education platform, verbatim, is our Early Learning Challenge grant that is in code in Ohio. She was a contributor on the Council for Chief State School Officers and their contribution to the standards. She's with the National Governors Association, C-SCOPE of Texas. She is the senior advisor for the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia. She's with AIR, which is our current Social Studies and Science test administrator. West Ed, which is Smarter Balanced Common Core test partner. The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL. If you go out and look at casel.org, C-A-S-E-L, take a look at what that website its objective is. This is not about academics anymore. The American Educational Research Association, she was the president of that. Go out and look at some of their agendas at their conferences. Alliance for Excellent Education. But this is where it gets really scary for me in the sense of when you know who Linda Darling Hammond is. Her influence in Ohio, she is commended, and it's in the state board minutes, with writing our Race to the Top application. She was the senior advisor and on the governing board of Teachscape. For those of you in the ed community, you know that is the new resident educator summative assessment is operated through Teachscape. They have a contract on that. Our teachers that go through an Ohio Teachers College have to send videos, portfolios, and so forth to Linda Darling Hammond's group to decide whether they can be certified as a teacher in Ohio. She was born in Cleveland, so she has history here as well. Lisa Gray, the woman here, I call her the Gates gal. Okay, she was a teacher in Indiana, came over, was employed by Battelle for Kids, went on to now be employed as the director of Ohio Ed through the Gates Foundation, and is currently working with Philanthropy Ohio as a consultant. She's the one that is behind the coalition of Common Core Standards Coalition in Ohio. But if you look at the entities that are up here, this is what I'm talking about in the sense of philanthropy. It's the corporatized foundation. These all have corporate qualities. They all have enough funds through foundations to be able to come in and affect policy. This is her testimony in 2013, which tells you qualifies exactly what I'm saying. She says, in 2009, we released Beyond Tinkering, our second report that focused on educator effectiveness in standards-based education. When she says we, she's talking about Philanthropy Ohio, who are not educators. They are simply an $11 billion endowed philanthropy. Over 80% of the recommendations in the Beyond Tinkering report have been adopted into law, and this is where it's important to understand this, implemented through Race to the Top and agency rule. Not implemented through legislation that went through the legislative process, that Ohioans, parents, ed community could go to Columbus and have their voice heard. No, they did it through agency rule and codifying that rubric, piece by piece by piece, so no one connects it. I mean, I have been told over and over. That's not Common Core. It is Common Core. It's the rubric. And if you can't make that connection, you'll never understand what we're really fighting. The Thomas B. Fordham Institute, the largest cheerleader for Common Core in Ohio, as far as an institution. They were paid, had received over $6 million from the Gates Foundation. They reviewed the standards, graded the states, and then they came in and helped implement it. If you look and see where their acknowledgments are in this report from 2010, which is the foreword to all of the states' ratings, generous support for this massive undertaking came from 4 sources. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation leads the charge. And they are upfront in this idea of the Common Core standards. Right there in the foreword, it says, as longtime supporters of national standards and tests, we're excited about the possibility this creates. That's key, because those who are shoving this down our throat and who are out educating the ed community, testifying against repeal legislation that the parents are backing and the taxpayers, they want national standards. They want national tests. They don't want you to have local control. One of the things that's been going on for the last 2 weeks that I keep getting emails about is, why are these certain schools getting a reprieve from the assessments? Why are they getting a waiver? This is just another ruse. There's the Innovation Lab Network schools. Ohio has the ability to give out 10 waivers. You have to be a member of that network, your school does. Primarily they're STEM schools. If you're not a STEM school, you can qualify how you're an innovation school. Dick Ross can then decide to give out 10 waivers. You apply to Dick Ross to get out of the Ohio assessment schedule. But then you have to send your new assessments that you're proposing to the U.S. Department of Education for approval. They will calibrate them there and then send them back and let you know whether you pass. So not only are you now dealing directly with the U.S. Department of Education, you've taken out your local community's voice, you've taken even out the state voice. You've got your local superintendent dealing directly with Arnie Duncan and looking for approval for those assessments. And the thing that's really scary about this is a pilot program. So 5 years from now, when they decide the pilot program wasn't that great, who pays for the failure? The local community does. In many ways, not just in the loss of education quality, but they lose because they're the ones funding it. And again, it all comes back to the CCSSO. And why is the CCSSO so prevalent in Ohio? And why is Dick Ross absolutely deaf to any complaints? Because he's a member of that. He represents that. And he's our governing member on the Park Consortium. So how did it get here? How could we be so far and we're just now waking up? Mainly because it's the power of incrementalism, the conditioning that we've been through. You don't know what you don't know, right? And here's an example. The federal control in education. Our nation's academic decline is proportionate to the federal government's increased involvement in education. Everybody, you either know that, or if nothing else, you can statistically prove it. There's empirical evidence, the data qualifies the correlation. But when you go and you say that to someone, well, you're anti-public ed. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You know, what do you think's going on? Well, what I know is going on, regardless, is that the more they get involved, the worse the outcome. And I can prove that. Man-made global warming. Man's increased use of fossil fuels is responsible for global warming. Can be solved by reducing carbon dioxide. It's a theory. There's no data to support that. And you may even believe that. But the reality is you can't qualify it through data. Yet, that's the theory. That's what's taught as fact in every single classroom in Ohio. We've accepted that. We've accepted that untruths can be, we can pay to have our children educated on untruths. We've accepted that. That's the conditioning. That's why it's so hard to get even those in our local communities, our local school board members, our superintendents, to hear us. Because they've been conditioned too. The state-led voluntary initiative. This is the essence of it. That a national assessment directed and paid for by the feds, which is aligned to copyrighted standards, which have never been tested anywhere, and were not developed by educators and academic professionals, but rather by a former consultant of McKinsey & Company, yes, the firm that advised Enron, who just so happened to go on to become the president of the College Board, and has aligned the SAT to Common Core, is a state-led voluntary initiative. That is what we are living. And again, if you say different, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's time for our local boards and parents to demand that the governor and the state legislature admit they were bought off by the feds and duped by a corporatist posing as a philanthropist in order to corporatize the education industry and nationalize education. That is what's happened. It requires us to fix it. This is a quote from Bill Gates a year and a half ago. It would be great if our, and that word is important, our education stuff worked, but that we won't know for probably a decade. Go back and look at the history of 10 years ago in Atlanta. Those of you who haven't heard about it, you've got 9 of those 10 educators or members of the ed community who are going to jail over fudging their numbers. Bill Gates was in Atlanta with a whole new initiative 10 years ago. What happens when 50 million children fail simultaneously? You have immediate equity. Everyone is the same. And if you don't think that's what they're after, think about what's happened in public ed policy and funding. The higher performing districts get less and less funding. They don't get any reprieve from mandates. So you've got this equity going over. So your quality falls. You have to follow the dumbed down standards, oppressive assessments. Eventually, you have your highest performing district with, on paper, looking no different than your urban Cleveland school. That is the objective. That's what equity is all about. Equity in education. So what's the future for Ohio's education system? I can contend it's wherever parents decide it's going to be. Because what we found out through the opt-out movement is you can stop this. You can become the client again versus Columbus being the client for our superintendents and wards. And that's critical. That has to happen. The other thing we realized is that they need us more than we need them. This is unlike any other industry. You can't be regulated in unless you choose to be. You simply opt out and make them correct it. We are the American public education system. I mean, it's quintessentially who we are. It's statutorily, philosophically, and innately the American system of self-government, local control, individual rights. Nothing else has maintained statutorily the same system that we still have in place in local education. We just don't feel it because we're allowing them to operate outside the law. That is what's going on. The federal government is forbidden to do what they're doing, but they go ahead anyway. We have state statute that are being violated on their face. Not just the spirit of the law, the letter of the law is being violated. But what's the recourse for the legislature to call out the ODE and the State Board of Ed? I would like someone to answer that for me. Because there has to be some recourse for when the lawmakers send over law to the administrating agency and they don't administer it according to the law. There has to be a recourse for that. So we're going to come back up at the end to respond to some of the questions, where are we at legislatively, and what can we do going forward.